Hello and welcome to another Magic the Gathering draft video. It's Al here with you, and this is how to draft MTG. It's my Duskmourn House of Horror draft guide to get you ready for the format. Let's get right into it. As always, please click like, click subscribe to support the channel. Leave a comment with your questions or your feedback. It's always much appreciated. Helps the channel a huge amount. Thank you so much. Getting straight into it with the archetypes for Duskmourn House of Horror. We're going to start with blue-green this time around, as it has the set's marquee mechanic in Manifest Dread. When you Manifest Dread, you look at the top two cards of your library, you put one onto the battlefield face down as a 2/2 creature, and the other into your graveyard. You can turn the face down 2/2 face up at any time by paying its mana cost if it's a creature card. Signposts on commons are Growing Dread. It's a 2-mana enchantment with flash that manifests Dread, and then whenever you turn a permanent face up, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. Oblivious Bookworm is a 2-mana 2/3. At the beginning of your end step, you get to draw a card and discard a card, but you don't have to discard a card if a permanent entered the battlefield face down under your control, or you turned something face up. So if you are manifesting Dread, if you're turning things face up, this is a free draw at the end of each of your turns. Huge. I'm also going to shout out the quote-unquote signpost 2-color rares for each deck. They're not all super synergistic or flavorful, but they are here. Zimone, All Questioning, is not super synergistic for this deck, but it is really good. It's 3-mana 1/1 that comes down with a 3/3 or a 5/5 most of the time. So just really good stats on that card. So in this archetype, we're going to be looking to take as many cards as we can that say Manifest Dread. We're also going to be looking for cards that care about face-down permanents entering the battlefield under our control, such as threats around every corner, or cards like Paranormal Analyst that trigger when we manifest Dread. This one lets us draw a card. Cryptid Inspector triggers whenever a face-down permanent enters or a permanent is turned face up. These are all things we're going to be doing a lot in this deck. We're going to be filling the graveyard a fair bit as a result of all this manifesting of Dread. So something like Under the Skin that lets us return a permanent card from graveyard to hand will be useful here. There are also a few cards that add extra mana when it's spent on turning something face up, such as Overgrown Zealot. This deck does get access to all of green's good fixing cards, and green-blue does tend to be a little light on removal, so splashing, particularly for black removal spells, is going to be useful here. And finally, with all this graveyard filling, we're going to be looking for cards with the Delirium mechanic. Delirium cares about having 4 or more different card types amongst cards in your graveyard. So creature, land, instant sorcery, artifact, enchantment being the most common ones. Next is black-green Delirium. Signpost on commons, Brood Spinner. It's a 2-mana 2/3 reach. Surveils 2 when it enters, and it can later be sacrificed to make 1/1 black and green insect creature tokens with flying equal to the number of card types amongst cards in your graveyard. Drag to the Roots. It's 2 black-green for an instant, destroys a non-land permanent, and costs 2 less if you have Delirium. And the rare for black-green, super powerful here, the Swarm Weaver is a 4-mana 2/3. When it enters, you get 2 1/1 insects with flying, and then if you have Delirium, those insects get +1/+1 and have Death Touch. So just a huge amount of stats for only 4 mana. It also has multiple types. It's an artifact and a creature, so if it ends up in your graveyard, it's going to help doubly with Delirium. So in this deck, we're going to be looking for cards that let us mill ourselves. Something like Patchwork Beastie here mills a card every turn, or say its name, mills 3, and then you get your choice of a land card from your graveyard to hand. Cards with multiple types, like we just said. So artifact creatures, enchantment creatures are in this set. We'll also be looking for creatures and other cards that want to make their way to the graveyard, such as Innocuous Rat. It's a 2-mana 1/1, and when it dies, you get to Manifest Dread. So not only do you want this to go into your graveyard as a creature, you also get Manifest Dread, which puts an additional card in your graveyard and gives you a 2/2. So a really nice one for this deck. Cards that let us discard cards from our hand are also powerful here. So Fanatic of the Harrowing, 4-mana 2/2. Each player discards, and then we get to draw. cards that have the Surveil mechanic, such as Wary Watchdog. And keep in mind that Terramorphic Expanse, a land that is sacrificed to find a basic land from your deck, is going to add to that Delirium count naturally for you. Next is blue-black Eerie-Control. Signpost uncommons. Fear of Infinity. It's a 3-mana 2/2 flying lifelink that can't block. And it's got the Eerie ability. Eerie is just shorthand for whenever an enchantment you control enters and whenever you fully unlock a room. That's what Eerie means. So whenever that happens, you may return Fear of Infinity from your graveyard to your hand. We'll talk about rooms in just a moment. Skullsnap Nuisance is a 2-mana 1/4 flying with the Eerie text. Whenever an enchantment enters, whenever you fully unlock a room, you surveil 1. And the rare here, Nashi, Searcher in the Dark, 2-mana 2/2 with Menace. When it hits the opponent, you mill that many cards, and then you could take enchantments from those milled cards and put them into your hand. So you're going to want to be running a high enchantment count to begin with, and Nashi will help you find those enchantments. So naturally, we're looking to put as many enchantments as we can into this deck, but we would like for them to also either be creatures or removal spells or card draw spells, and that's what we have here. So Fear of Lost Teeth is a 1-mana 1/1 enchantment creature. It'll block for you early. When it dies, it could deal damage to something, gain you a life, keep you in the game. Nowhere to Run is a 2-mana enchantment with Flash, give something -3/-3 when it comes in. And Glimmer Burst is an instant for 3 in a blue. You draw 2 cards and then you make a 1/1 enchantment creature token. So all of these, of course, are going to trigger Eerie for you and add to your overall enchantment count for cards that care about that. Of course, we have Rooms. Room is a new card type. Rooms are split cards. You could decide which half you want to cast. When you cast it, it unlocks. When it hits the battlefield, you get its effect, and then you can later pay the mana cost of the other half to unlock that half and get its effect. So in this case, we got Meat Locker. So if we wanted to play the left side first, we'd pay 2 in a blue. It would come down, unlock, and it would tap up to 1 target creature and put 2 stun counters on it. And then later, we could pay 3 blue to unlock Drowned Diner. It says when you unlock this, draw 3 cards, and then discard a card. And we could do that in the opposite order as well. We could play Drowned Diner first, draw 3, discard 1, and then later tap down a creature of our opponents. This particular room fits really well in this deck because not only does it affect the board in slowing down one of your opponent's creatures, it also provides card advantage, which a control deck like this is looking for. There are also some cards that add mana specifically to cast enchantments and unlock doors of rooms, such as Creeping Peeper. And just a couple of really good Eerie cards to shout out here. Dashing Bloodsucker, 4-mana 2/5. And it has Eerie. It gains +2/+0 and lifelink until end of turn, so blocks really well for you and then can attack as a threat later in the game and catch you back up on life. Unwilling Vessel is 3 mana for a 3/2 with Vigilance. It has Eerie. Whenever an enchantment enters, you unlock a room. It gets a possession counter. When it dies, you get an XX with flying equal to the number of counters on Unwilling Vessel. So another card that can get into combat early for you and hopefully will leave something behind when it dies. Give you some value. A cool interaction I want to point out with this deck, it's a card called Defiled Crypt, which says whenever 1 or more cards leave your graveyard, you get a 2/2 black horror enchantment creature token. And then Fear of Infinity that we discussed earlier, whenever an enchantment enters, this comes back from your graveyard to your hand. So if you have Defiled Crypt in play and Fear of Infinity in your graveyard, when you trigger Eerie, you'll get Fear of Infinity back, and you'll get a 2/2 token. But it also works the other way, where if you were to unlock Cadaver Lab, for example, and return some other creature card from your graveyard to your hand, it would trigger Defiled Crypt. You get the 2/2 enchantment token, which triggers Eerie, and you get the Fear of Infinity back. So it's not totally infinite, but it is just a ton of value, and I think these cards play super well together in this deck. White-Green Survival is next. This is all about creatures being tapped at the beginning of your second main phase. So, for example, we have Shrewd Storyteller, 1 green-white for a 3/3. At the beginning of your second main phase, if it's tapped, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creatures. The idea is it's attacked and it's survived combat, and now you get an extra bonus. Baseball Bat is our other signpost uncommon. It's green-white for an equipment. It attaches to a creature right away, gives +1/+1, and whenever that creature attacks, tap up to 1 target creature. So it gives you the ability to tap a survival creature without having to attack with that survival creature. And our rare is Rip Spawn Hunter. It's a 4-mana 4/4. has survival. You get to reveal the top X cards of your library, where X is its power. You get any number of creature and or vehicles with different powers amongst them into your hand. So just a really nice card advantage engine stapled to a 4-mana 4/4. So we're, of course, looking for creatures with the survival ability, such as Acrobatic Cheerleaders, 2-mana 2/2. If it's tapped at the beginning of your second main phase, it gets a flying counter. And we're going to look for ways to tap our creatures without having to attack with them, because you may not always be able to get in for an attack cleanly. So something like Coordinated Clobbering, so single green for sorcery. Tap 1 or 2 target untapped creatures you control, and they each deal damage equal to their power to target creature and opponent control. So not only is it a removal spell, it's also going to trigger 1 or even 2 survival abilities for you. And then, of course, we'll want combat tricks to make sure that our creatures get through. So jump scare, single white, +2/+2, and flying. Your opponent's going to be highly incentivized to block, since your creature is going to give you a bonus if it survives combat, so they're more likely to walk into your combat tricks. It's worth noting that if you ever get a vehicle going in this deck, there are only a couple of them in the set, but if you ever get this going, it's a repeatable way to tap your creatures for free, and you can tap as many as you want, even if it's only a crew 1 ability like this one. Black-Red Sacrifice is next, our signpost on commons. Disturbing Mirth is 2 mana for an enchantment. When it enters, you may sacrifice another enchantment or creature. If you do, you draw 2 cards, and then when you sacrifice Disturbing Mirth, you get to manifest Dread. Sawblade Skin Ripper. It's 3 mana for a 3/2 menace. You can pay 2, sacrifice another creature or enchantment to put a +1/+1 counter on it. At the beginning of your end step, if you sacrifice 1 or more permanents, it deals that much damage to any target. And our rare Undead Sprinter is a 2 mana 2/2 with trample and haste. You can cast it from your graveyard if a non-zombie creature died this turn, and if you do, it comes in with a +1/+1 counter on it. So as you're going to be sacrificing creatures pretty regularly in this deck, you should have no problem getting this back multiple times. So in a deck like this, we're looking for ways to cheaply and repeatedly sacrifice our stuff, like Diversion Specialist, which allows us to pay 1 mana and sacrifice another creature enchantment to exile the top card of our library and play it this turn if we want. We're looking for cheap stuff to sacrifice that has death ability, so Clockwork Percussionist, for example, 1 mana 1/1 haste. When it dies, exile the top card of your library and play it this turn, or till the end of your next turn, I should say. We're also looking for stuff that makes tokens, so something like Razorkin Horde Caller, 5 mana 4/4, haste, makes a 1/1 when it attacks. This won't come up as much, but if you have a room card in play that you've gotten what you wanted out of it, you could always sacrifice that as well. White-Black Reanimator, super cool. Rite of the Moth is our first signpost. 1 white, black. For a sorcery, return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. It also has flashback for 6 mana. So we get to use it twice. Shroud Stomper is 7 mana for a 5/5 Death Touch. When it enters or attacks, each opponent loses 2 life, you gain 2 life, and you draw a card. The rare doesn't do a ton for us here. Victor Valgavoth's Seneschal, hopefully I'm saying that right. 3 mana for a 3/3. It has a bunch of different eerie abilities. Most often you're just going to get to Surveil 2, which is not bad because you can put a big thing into your graveyard to reanimate, and it is a 3 mana 3/3, but not a huge pull into the deck. So in this deck, we're going to be looking for giant things to bring back from the graveyard, such as Vile Mutilator, 6/5 Flying Trample, make them sacrifice an enchantment and a creature when it comes into play, and Shepherding Spirits, 6 mana 4/5 with flying. But the beauty of this one is it can put itself into the graveyard with its plane cycling ability, where you can discard it for 2 mana, search for a plains. And there are quite a few actual reanimation spells in the set, so we'll be looking for those, such as Emerge from the Cocoon, 5 mana, bring something back from the graveyard, and you gain 3 life. Be looking for ways to discard cards from our hands, such as Possessed Goat. So 1 mana 1/1, you can pay 3, discard a card to put 3 +1/+1 counters on it. Manifest Dread can also be useful here. Unsettling Twins, so 4 mana for a 2/2. When it enters, you manifest Dread. Get to look at the top 2, and you can decide to put a big creature into the graveyard and something else face down as a 2/2 creature. Pretty nice. And finally, cards like Commune with Evil, 3 mana to look at the top 4, put 1 into your hand, the rest in your graveyard, and you gain 3 life. Easy way to set up having a big creature in the graveyard. Next is Red-Green Delirium-Aggro. Signpost on commons, Beastie Beatdown. This is red-green for a sorcery. It's a fight spell, but if you have Delirium, you put 2 +1/+1 counters on your creature. Wildfire Wickerfolk is 2 mana for a 3/2 with haste. It's an artifact creature, which is obviously really nice for enabling Delirium. And if you have Delirium, it gets +1/+1 and has trample. Peer Past the Veil is our rare. This is 4 mana for an instant. You discard your hand and then draw X cards, X being the number of card types among cards in your graveyard. Worth noting, this can even set itself up if you have like a land and a spell you don't need in your hand. You discard both of those. That might actually add to the amount of cards you're going to draw from this. And in an aggressive deck like this, you'll often be empty-handed by turn 5 or 6, and this could just completely reload you to push for the win. So in a deck like this, we're going to be looking to turn on Delirium, but we're also going to want to be making sure that we're pushing damage. So something like Wary Watchdog is perfect here. It's a 2 mana 3/1 that surveils on entering or dying, so it's kind of doing both there. Defiant Survivor is 3 mana for a 3/2. If it's tapped in your second main phase, you get to Manifest Dread, so you're attacking, pushing damage, adding to your board, and setting up Delirium. And while we're doing all that attacking, we're going to want combat tricks, so something like Turn Inside Out, single red, +3/+0, and if the creature dies, you get to Manifest Dread. So not only is it going into your graveyard as an instant to set up Delirium, if you get that Manifest Dread, you get 2 more looks at your 4th card type to put in the bin. Some good payoffs for this deck. Hand That Feeds, a 2 mana 2/2, but if you have Delirium, it's a 4/2 menace. So it grows with the game and is super aggressive. Fear of Burning Alive is a 6 mana 4/4. Enters, deals 4 to the opponent, but if you have Delirium, it also deals 4 to a creature they control, which is super, super good. And don't forget that Terramorphic Expanse, again, is going to fix your mana and help you hit Delirium. White-red is power 2 or less aggro. Signpost uncommons, Arabella Abandoned Doll is a 2 mana 1/3. When it attacks, it deals X damage to each opponent, and you gain X life, where X is the number of creatures you control with power 2 or less. So we just want to have a lot of creatures with power 2 or less. How many times am I going to say that? Midnight Mayhem is going to help us do that. This 4 mana for a sorcery. You get 3 1/1s, and then they gain Menace, Lifelink, and Haste until end of turn. So you can kind of see what's going on here. Our rare is the Jolly Balloon Man. Not super synergistic here, but I'll read it anyways. It's a 3 mana for a 1/4 with Haste. You can pay 1 and tap it to create a token that's a copy of another creature you control, except it's a 1/1 with flying and haste, and then it gets sacrificed at the beginning of the end step. So this one does work in the context of this deck, but you're just going to want to make sure that you're combining it with creatures that have enters the battlefield effects. So we're going to be looking for creatures that care about other creatures having power 2 or less. So Split Skin Doll is a 2 mana 2/1. When it enters, you draw a card, and then you discard a card unless you control another creature with power 2 or less. Kind of good either way, but obviously great if you're just straight up drawing a card. Irreverent Gremlin is a 2 mana 2/2 with Menace. When another creature with power 2 or less enters, you get to Rummage. And then we're going to want to set these up and trigger these as quickly as possible. So we're going to want 1-drops in this deck. Something like Veteran Survivor, 1 mana 2/1 that grows later in the game is going to be excellent here. We'll also be looking for more expensive, impactful cards that still only have 2 power. So Unsettling Twins being a 2/2 that manifests Dread, gives you another 2/2, is really nice. Most Valuable Slayer is a 4 mana 2/4, and whenever you attack, target attacking creature gets +1/+0 and gains first strike until the end of turn. So this doesn't even have to attack. It could be any one of your creatures, and first strike is no joke. So this is actually quite powerful at 4 mana and still fits the 2-power theme. And of course, combat tricks in an aggressive deck, you're going to want 2 or 3 of these. Jump Scare, single white for +2/+2, and flying. Blue-white is Eerie-Aggro. So Eerie, again, being enchantments, entering, and rooms being fully unlocked. Gremlin Tamer is a 2 mana 2/2 with Eerie. You get a 1/1 red creature token. And Inquisitive Glimmer is 2 mana for a 2/3. Says enchantments you cast cost 1 less, and unlock costs are 1 less as well. Our rare is Restricted Office / Lecture Hall. You're really going to be only interested in the left side of this, I think. Restricted Office, 4 mana for a room. When it comes down, destroys all creatures with power 3 or greater. So we're playing a pretty low to the ground aggro deck. So this will get some big, tough blockers out of the way and hopefully allow you to swing in for the win. So we're going to be looking for aggressively slanted creatures with Eerie abilities, such as Optimistic Scavenger, 1 mana 1/1 that grows with Eerie. We're going to be looking for as many enchantments as we can get for this deck. Ideally, we want them to be cheap creatures, so Fear of Surveillance, 2 mana 2/2 enchantment creature with some nice bonuses, or Fear of Isolation, 2 mana 2/3 flying. It also has the added bonus of making you return a permanent you control to its owner's hand, so you get to re-trigger your Eerie abilities if you're returning enchantments back to your hand, and you might even get a Rooms ability twice as well. Cards that create Glimmer enchantment tokens are really nice. So Tunnel Surveyor, 3-mana 2/2, makes a 1/1 Glimmer enchantment creature token. We would love for our removal spells to also be enchantments, so Sheltered by Ghost, really powerful here, 2-mana. Aura, when it enters, you exile a non-land permanent your opponent's control, and your enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and has lifelink and ward 2. So not only getting their best thing out of the way, but improving your own creature, making it tougher to kill, and giving you that lifelink buffer as well. Really good here. And we want combat tricks in our aggressive deck. We'd love for them to be enchantments as well, because why not? So single white for Shard Mage's Rescue enchantment. Aura with Flash gives hexproof and +1/+1. And finally, of course, rooms. How could we forget rooms? We want our rooms to impact the board and push damage, so Grand Entryway here, 2-mana, you make a 1/1 Glimmer, and then Elegant Rotundas, 3-mana, you get a +1/+1 counter on up to each of 2 target creatures. So the left side of this Grand Entryway is going to give you 2 Eerie triggers right off the bat, and then, of course, the right side is just going to push extra damage for you and give you an Eerie trigger. Another good room for this deck is Bottomless Pool, single blue, returns a creature to its owner's hand. Locker Room, not as important, but just keep your eyes open for enchantments that can act as removal spells for you to push some damage. Finally, we've got the only deck that I'm going to actually say draft with caution. I'm going to give my draft with caution grade to this one here. I don't think it's necessarily a bad deck, but I think it's going to be a little bit more difficult to put together and might take some extra uncommons and rares to really make it tick. This is Blue-Red Rooms, our Signpost Uncommons. This one is a room. It's Smoky Lounge and Misty Salon. So Smoky Lounge, 2 and a red. For a room, it says at the beginning of your first main phase, you add red, but you can spend that mana only to cast room spells and unlock doors. The Misty Salon is 3 and a blue. When you unlock it, you get an XX blue spirit creature token with flying, where X is the number of unlocked doors among rooms you control. So if you just had this one and you unlocked both sides, you would get a 2/2 flying. It's honestly pretty good, but of course if you've got a few rooms in place, it's going to be huge. And then our other Signpost Uncommon is Intruding Soul Ragers, 2-mana 2/2 Vigilance. You can tap it to sacrifice a room and have it deal 2 damage to each opponent and draw a card. So if you've gotten what you needed out of your rooms, you can cycle them for new cards and deal a little bit of damage in the process. Our rare is Roaring Furnace Steaming Sauna. Roaring Furnace is 1 and a red. When you unlock it, it deals damage equal to the number of cards in your hand to target creature and opponent controls. So if you're playing this early, you should be able to get at least 4 damage pretty reliably out of it. Of course, later in the game, it's not going to be very good, but I think it's good enough to include here. And then Steaming Sauna is 3 blue, says you have no maximum hand size at the beginning of your end step, draw a card. So this will just completely take over the game if you can stall things out until you can get to it. So of course we're going to be looking to play as many room cards as we can, and we want them to impact the board and remove our opponent's creatures. So Glassworks and Shattered Yard is going to be a real key one here. Glassworks is 3 mana, deal 4, and Shattered Yard is 5 mana, just deals them a damage every turn. Doesn't really matter that much, but works well in a long game deck. Meat Locker, Drowned Diner, we already looked at. 3 mana, tap their thing, put 2 stun counters, and 5 mana, draw 3, discard 1. Just really good in a control deck. We're going to be looking for cards that can block well early for us, take over the game later. So Rampaging Soul Rager being one of those. 3 mana, 1/4, blocks well early, and then it gets +3/+0 if there are 2 or more unlocked doors amongst rooms you control, which isn't really that much. And then you've got a 4/4 bashing your opponent in. Ghostly Keybearer is a nice effect here. It's 4 mana, 3/3 flying. When it deals combat damage to a player, you get to unlock a door. And then we'll look for ways to sacrifice rooms that we don't need anymore and get some value there. So Betrayer's Bargain, 2 mana, you have to sacrifice an enchantment or pay an additional 2, and then it deals 5 damage to target creature and exiles that creature. Effects that let us pick up and replay our rooms can be really nice in this deck to get their abilities again, so something like Fear of Isolation. Control decks like this are always looking for ways to deal with small creatures on the other side. So Pyroclasm, 2 mana, deal 2 to all creatures, going to be really important to this deck in particular. Of course, we want lots of cheap removal spells, ideally in enchantment form, as we will have some Eerie stuff going on as well. So Unable to Scream, single blue, turn their thing into an 0/2 with no abilities is really nice here. All right, so now we'll just look at some cards that I think you'll want to be picking up early. These are cards that are flexible and fit into all of their respective archetypes and have a good baseline power level. So you're going to be happy to pick these up early. These are no particular order, just sorted by color here. So white, we've got Split Skin Doll, 2 mana, 2/1, draw a card and then discard unless you have another creature with power 2 or less. Sheltered by Ghosts, it's an aura on one of your creatures that exiles something of theirs. Glimmer Seeker. This is a 3-mana 3/3 with survival. You get a 1/1 Glimmer, and then if you already have a Glimmer, you get to draw a card instead. In blue, we've got Tunnel Surveyor. We already talked about 3-mana 2/2, makes a 1/1 Glimmer when it comes in. Stay Hidden, Stay Silent. It's a really nice removal spell for 2 mana. Taps a creature, locks it down, and then later you can pay 6 to shuffle that creature into its owner's library and manifest dread. So get rid of it for good and get a little bit of value. And of course, it's an enchantment for everything that cares about that. Glimmer Burst. This is 4 mana for an instant. You draw 2 and you get a 1/1 Glimmer token. In black, we got Withering Torment. 3 mana instant, destroy a creature enchantment and lose 2 life. Can't get much better than that. Nowhere to Run. 2 mana enchantment with flash. Target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn. And Osseous Stick Twister. 2 mana 2/2. Artifact creature with lifelink, and it has Delirium. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent may sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. And if they don't, then this deals damage equal to its power. So you hit them for 2 and you gain 2. Pretty nice. Red's got Scorching Dragonfire, a classic here. 2 mana, deal 3, and then if the creature dies, it's exile, which is especially relevant in this set with Delirium. Piggy Bank is 2 mana for a 3/2 that artifact creature that dies into a treasure token. And Irreverent Gremlin is 2 mana for a 2/2 menace. Whenever another creature you control with power 2 or less enters, you get to rummage. We also have Razorkin, Horde Caller, the 5 mana 4/4 haste that makes a 1/1 every time it attacks. In green, we've got Threats around every corner. 4 mana for an enchantment, you manifest dread, and then whenever a face down permanent enters, including the manifest dread you just did, you get to search for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield tapped. So really nice. House Cartographer is 2 mana for a 2/2 with survival. If it's tapped in your second main phase, you get to reveal cards from the top of your library until you hit a land, and you put that land into your hand. Defiant Survivor is 3 mana for a 3/2 survival. You get to manifest dread. Coordinated Clobbering, single green, tap 1 or 2 creatures you control, and they punch something. And Monstrous Emergence is 1 and a green for a sorcery. You choose a creature you control or reveal a creature from your hand, and it deals damage equal to the power of that creature to target creature. And the way this is worded, even if they kill your creature out from under you, this still works, which is really nice. And then some of my favorite signpost uncommons here: Oblivious Bookworm, Brood Spinner, Gremlin Tamer, Sawblade Skin Ripper, Shrewd Storyteller, and I'll cap this list off with Terramorphic Expanses. This just fits into any deck for you and is often going to provide some extra synergy if you're going for Delirium, and it also works with the sacrifice theme of red-black. We'll have a quick look at the fixing in this set as well, as it's actually quite good. There's a full set of 10 common dual lands that enter tapped unless a player has 13 or less life. So really no downside to playing these, and these are the types of cards you're going to pick out of a pack if there's nothing exciting going on, just to keep your options open. There's a set of 5 rare dual lands that tap for a color and then an allied color if you control a basic of either one of those colors. Kind of hard to explain in words, but when you see them, you'll get it. And then we also have Keys to the House. This is a single mana for an artifact. You can pay 1, tap, and sacrifice it to search for a basic land and put it into your hand. So not only is this fixing your mana in any deck, it's feeding your Delirium count as well. And a little bit of the usual draft strategy. You want to stay as close to one color if possible in pack 1. A few off-color cards are okay, and you want to prioritize cheaper cards where possible. The better your early picks are, the more you want to stick to that color that you're in. The worse your early picks are, the more you're going to be willing to take chances on other colors as the pack goes around. And pay special attention to picks 9 through 14. These are known as the wheel. The pack has gone all the way around the table, and these are the cards that no one has selected, so it can give you a lot of helpful information about what colors are not being drafted at the table, and you may want to consider moving in. In packs 2 and 3, we're going to continue to take powerful cards of our main color where possible, and let the good cards we open or get past determine our secondary color and final archetype. Pay special attention to the pack direction. If you've never drafted in person before, Arena doesn't really show this that well, so just make sure to remember that the packs are going clockwise on pack 1 and 3 and counterclockwise in pack 2. So in pack 2, you're likely to see kind of the opposite signals, if you will, from the stuff you were seeing in pack 1. So if you're seeing a lot of good green cards flowing in pack 1, in pack 2 you probably won't see as many green cards since the packs are moving the opposite direction, but that's not a reason to switch out of green. If you've identified that green is happening in pack 1, it should be flowing again for you in pack 3, and that's how you can really gain an advantage during the draft portion. All right, now it's time to play everyone's favorite game, Where Does It Belong? As you're drafting, always be thinking where cards are going to go. How many different decks do they fit in? And try to leave yourself open to more possibilities as opposed to less as you're drafting. So we got Withering Torment here. This is the 2 and a black instant, destroy creature enchantment, lose 2 life. This is going to go in any black deck. Every deck wants cheap instant speed removal, so you're happy to take this early, and it's always going to make your deck. Fanatic of the Harrowing. This is 3 and a black for a 2/2. When it enters, each player discards a card, and if you discarded a card this way, you draw a card. This is a really powerful card, quite flexible. It's great in black-green because it's going to help enable Delirium. It's great in black-white because it allows you to put big creatures in your graveyard to reanimate. And it's pretty good in black-blue as that's a control deck that just wants to sort of grind resources over the course of the game. However, I would suggest that black-red, being the sacrifice deck, isn't really super interested in a 4-mana 2/2 that doesn't have any synergy with its actual game plan. And it's a bit more of an aggro deck, so these stats aren't good there either. Commune with Evil. It's 2 and a black for a sorcery. Look at the top 4, put 1 into your hand, the rest in your graveyard, and you gain 3 life. Obviously super excellent in black-green Delirium, where this could set up Delirium all by itself and get you back into the game. Similarly, black-white wants this because you can put big creatures into your graveyard and catch up on life if you've fallen a little bit behind. But black-blue isn't really that interested in something like this, as it's not playing from the graveyard very much, and black-red certainly doesn't care about this card at all. And then finally, Vile Mutilator, super powerful, 7 mana 6/5. As an additional cost to cast it, you have to sacrifice a creature enchantment. It's got flying and trample. When it enters, each opponent sacrifices a non-token enchantment and a non-token creature. Super, super powerful card, but really only at its best in black-white. Black decks are going to have a really, really hard time casting this card or even making it to the point in the game where they can cast it. So even though all of these cards are quite good, it's important to think during the draft about where they can potentially fit and what decks you're setting yourself up to draft. So you don't want to lock yourself into only being able to draft a single deck early in. You don't want to lock yourself into a single archetype early in the draft when you don't know which colors are flowing to you yet. Finally, some deck building tips. Play 2 colors. Really avoid splashing a 3rd color unless your mana base is built for it. You don't want to be playing more than 1 basic land of your off color. So you want to make sure you've got stuff like Terramorphic Expanse or other cards that can search for lands or dual lands to make a splash happen. Play 17 lands. A deck with no cards that cost more than 4 mana can play 16 lands, but most of the time we're going to want 17, maybe even 18 if this is a slower format. And as always, play a low curve. Lots of cheap cards, few expensive cards. Thank you so much. That's going to do it for this one. Please click like, click subscribe, leave a comment with your feedback or questions or just to say hello. All of it helps the channel a huge amount. And you can contact me directly at howtodraftmtg@gmail.com if you have any questions or want to inquire about private coaching. Until next time, good luck in your drafts. Bye for now.